He crossed to her side in 3 long strides, his expression unreadable beneath the beard. "Stay put," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in the forest. "You're suffering from exposure and exhaustion. Your body needs rest." "My baby," Eliza began, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "The child seems fine," he replied. "Been kicking up a storm since I got you warmed up. Strong one you've got there." Relief flooded through her, bringing fresh tears to eyes that felt raw and gritty. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving us." The man shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. "Couldn't leave you out there for the wolves, could I? Though they might not have harmed you if I hadn't come along. Storm's pack is curious about humans more than they're hungry for them. Still, not a risk I'd want to take. You know them? The wolves?" Eliza asked, remembering how he had addressed the alpha by name. Something shifted in the man's expression, a softening around the eyes perhaps, or a slight easing of the tight line of his mouth. "We have an understanding. The pack and I've been sharing this valley for going on 15 years now. They keep to their business, I keep to mine, and occasionally our paths cross without bloodshed." He turned back to the stove, lifting a pot lid and stirring whatever was cooking inside. The rich aroma of meat and vegetables filled the cabin, making Eliza's stomach growl audibly. Her rescuer's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Food's nearly ready. Think you can sit up for a bowl of stew?" With his help, Eliza managed to prop herself against the headboard of what she now realized was his bed. He brought her a wooden bowl filled with steaming venison stew and a chunk of crusty bread, then pulled a chair up beside the bed while she ate. "Name's Gabriel Reese," he said as she finished the last of the bread. "Most folks just call me Reese. This is my cabin, and you're about 20 miles from the nearest town, which would be Clearwater. Blizzard's likely to keep us snowed in for at least 3 days, maybe longer." "I'm Eliza Blackwood," she replied, setting the empty bowl aside. "And I can't thank you enough for what you've done. Mr. Reese, once the storm passes, I'll be on my way and won't trouble you further." Reese raised an eyebrow, his gaze dropping pointedly to her swollen belly. "And where exactly do you plan on going in your condition, Miss Blackwood? Especially with winter just getting started up here." The question hung in the air between them, and Eliza felt the fragile composure she'd maintained crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. The events of the past months, the abandonment, the rejection, the desperate journey came crashing down on her all at once. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Reese didn't speak, didn't offer empty platitudes or awkward comfort. He simply waited, giving her the dignity of privacy in her grief, despite being only feet away. When her tears finally subsided, he handed her a clean handkerchief without comment. "I have nowhere," Eliza admitted, wiping her eyes. "My family disowned me when they learned I was pregnant and unmarried. The baby's father disappeared the moment I told him. I came here looking for a cousin who might have taken me in, only to learn she died last winter." She gave a bitter laugh. "That held no humor. I guess I thought I could find her cabin and, I don't know, start over somehow." "Your cousin," Reese said slowly. "Would that be Martha Blackwood?" Eliza's head snapped up in surprise. "Yes, did you know her? Everyone in these mountains knew Martha. Tough as old leather and twice as useful. Good herbalist, better neighbor." His expression darkened. "She didn't just die, Miss Blackwood. She was murdered by poachers who thought she'd reported them to the game warden. Which she had, because Martha couldn't abide those who took more than they needed from the land." The news hit Eliza like a physical blow. She had never met her cousin, knowing of her only through occasional mentions in family conversations, usually accompanied by disapproving tones. Martha had been the family rebel, choosing a solitary life in the wilderness over marriage and conventional society. In Eliza's darkest moments after her own rejection, She had remembered those stories and thought that perhaps Martha would understand her situation, would offer the acceptance her parents had not. "I'm sorry," Rhys said, seeing her distress. "Didn't mean to be so blunt about it." Martha was a friend of sorts, though she kept to herself much as I do. What happened to her cabin? Eliza asked, clinging to the last thread of her desperate plan. Burned to the ground, same night they killed her. Nothing left but the stone chimney and some charred timber. He studied her face carefully. "You really had no idea what you were walking into, did you?" Eliza shook her head, fresh tears. "Threatening. I had nowhere else to go," she repeated, the words falling from her lips like stones. Rhys was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire as if searching for answers in the dancing flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was gruff, but not unkind. "Well, you're here now, and in no condition to be going anywhere until that child is born, at the very least. Spring would be better, once the pass is clear. Until then, I suppose you'll have to stay." Eliza stared at him in disbelief. "Stay? Here? With you?" The suggestion would have scandalized her parents and everyone in her small hometown. An unmarried, pregnant woman living under the same roof as a single man, and a reclusive mountain man at that. But those social concerns seemed absurdly trivial compared to the very real threat of death that waited outside in the winter wilderness. Rhys shrugged, apparently unbothered by the impropriety. "Cabin's got 2 rooms. You can have the bedroom. I'll take the workshop. Got a cot out there I use when I'm working late anyway." He stood up, taking her empty bowl. "Get some rest, Miss Blackwood. We can figure out the details tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Eliza called after him. "Why would you do this? Take in a stranger, burden yourself with a pregnant woman for months. You don't know anything about me." Rhys paused at the door, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the lamplight. "I know you've got courage, coming up these mountains alone in your condition. Know you've got determination, fighting against that storm. And I know what it's like to have nowhere else to go." He glanced back at her, his expression softening slightly. Besides, Martha would have done the same for kin. Consider it honoring her memory. With that, he was gone, leaving Eliza alone, with the crackling fire and the howling wind outside. She sank back against the pillows, one hand resting protectively on her belly where their child moved restlessly. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope. Outside, a wolf howled, the sound carrying through the wilderness like a question. And somewhere in the darkness, another wolf answered, the 2 voices twining together in the ancient language of the wild. Eliza closed her eyes, letting the primal symphony wash over her as sleep claimed her once more. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, at least, she and her unborn child were safe. The 3rd week of December brought a cold snap that turned the mountain air brittle as glass. Eliza had settled into a cautious routine in Gabriel Rhys's cabin, finding a strange comfort in the simplicity of wilderness life. Each morning, she woke to the smell of coffee brewing on the wood stove and the sound of Rhys chopping firewood. Outside, he was always up before dawn, moving through his daily tasks with the quiet efficiency of a man who had long ago mastered the art of self-sufficiency. For the first few days they had circled each other warily, like 2 creatures unused to sharing territory. Rhys was a man of few words, answering her questions directly, but volunteering little about himself. Eliza, still overwhelmed by the dramatic turn her life had taken, had been content with the silence, using the time to regain her strength and consider her limited options. The cabin, though rustic, was surprisingly comfortable. Rhys had built it himself. That much was obvious from the craftsmanship evident in every joint and beam. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with the large stone fireplace as its heart. Her bedroom was small but snug, with a window that looked out on the forest and mountains beyond. The 3rd room was Rhys's workshop, where he created remarkably beautiful furniture and carvings from the local timber. On the fourth day, Eliza had emerged from her room to find Rhys setting a basket on the kitchen table. Inside were neatly folded clothes, simple, practical garments that would fit over her growing belly. "Found these in one of my storage trunks," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Martha left some things here once, when she was helping me after I took ill a few winters back. They should suit you better than what you came with." Eliza had touched the fabrics with something close to reverence. Her own clothes had been nearly threadbare even before her desperate journey, and now they were stained and torn beyond repair. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take good care of them." Rhys had merely nodded and headed out to check his traplines, leaving Eliza to change into a warm flannel dress that accommodated her 6-month belly with room to spare. The simple kindness had broken something inside her, some final defense against trusting this stranger who had saved her life. Now 2 weeks into her stay, Eliza sat by the fireplace, mending one of Rhys's shirts while he carved a small wooden figure at the table. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside the cabin was warm and peaceful. The silence between them had gradually evolved from awkward to companionable, though Eliza still knew very little about the man who had taken her in. "You're good with a needle," Rhys observed, glancing up from his carving to watch her deft stitches. "My mother insisted all her daughters learn household skills," Eliza replied, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice when thinking of the woman who had turned her back when Eliza needed her most. "Said no man would marry a girl who couldn't keep a proper home. Your mother sounds like a practical woman." "She is." Eliza tied off a neat knot and bit the thread. "Practical enough to know that a daughter with a bastard child would ruin the family's standing in the community. Practical enough to choose social approval over her own flesh and blood." She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but the words had poured out before she could stop them. Rhys's hands stilled on his carving, and he studied her with those penetrating gray-blue eyes. "Family can be the greatest comfort or the deepest wound," he said finally. "Sometimes both at once. You sound like you speak from experience." Eliza ventured, seizing the opportunity to learn more about her mysterious host. Rhys was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his carving knife and ran a hand through his beard, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of inner debate. "Had a family once," he said, his voice low and rough like stones tumbling down a mountainside. "Wife, son, little house in town where I worked construction. Normal life, or what passed for it." The past tense hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken tragedy. Eliza waited, the shirt forgotten in her lap. "Mudslide took them both while I was away working a job in another county," Rhys continued, his eyes now fixed on the fire. "Spring of '09. Heavy rains that year saturated the hillside above our place. Middle of the night, the whole slope gave way. 15 people died, including Sarah and little James." "Gabriel," Eliza whispered, using his given name for the first time. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head slightly, as if to dislodge the memories. "Been 15 years now. Time doesn't heal all wounds like they say, but it teaches you to carry them differently. Coming up here, living by my own hands, making peace with the wilderness, it's been my way of carrying the weight." "And the wolves?" Eliza asked gently. "How did you come to have such an understanding with them?" A ghost of a smile flickered across Rhys's face. "That was Storm's doing, not mine. Found her as a pup the first year I was here, caught in one of my traps. Should have killed her. By rights, that's what any sensible trapper would do with a wolf. But there was something in those eyes." He trailed off, lost in the memory. "I couldn't do it. Freed her instead, splinted her leg, and let her go. Figured that was the end of it. But she came back, first alone and then with others from her pack, kept a respectful distance, but made it clear this was as much their territory as mine. Over the years, we worked out a kind of truce. They don't bother my livestock, I don't trap in their denning grounds, and occasionally we cross paths without bloodshed. Eliza thought of the massive wolf that had stood before her in the snow, intelligent eyes assessing her with unnerving calculation. She remembered you. When you called to her in the forest. Wolves have long memories, especially for kindness. Or cruelty, Rhys said. Storm's 8 years old, now ancient for a wild wolf. She's led the pack for the last 4 years since the old alpha died. Smart as any human I've known, and a damn sight more honorable than most. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as Rhys returned to his carving and Eliza to her mending. But something had shifted between them. A door opened that had previously been closed. They had shared pieces of their broken pasts, and in doing so, created the fragile beginnings of trust. Later that night, as Eliza lay in bed listening to the wind shake the cabin's sturdy walls, she felt her baby move within her. The child was more active at night, as if testing the boundaries of its watery world while she tried to rest. She placed her hand over a particularly forceful kick and whispered, "You're safe here, little one. We both are." For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Eliza allowed herself to truly believe those words. The days fell into a rhythm as December deepened toward the solstice. Rhys taught Eliza the routines that sustained life in the wilderness, how to bank the fire to last through the night, how to preserve meat in the smokehouse, how to read the weather from the patterns of clouds over the mountains. In return, she took over the cooking and mending, bringing a woman's touch to the bachelor cabin that had known only the most basic necessities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On the morning of the winter solstice, Eliza woke to find Rhys gone and a small wooden figure placed on the table beside her breakfast. It was a wolf, carved with such precision that it seemed poised to leap into motion at any moment. Each detail was perfect, from the alert ears to the intelligent eyes to the powerful haunches. Running her fingers over the smooth wood, Eliza marveled at the skill it had taken to create such life from a simple block of pine. When Rhys returned that afternoon, his coat dusted with snow and his arms laden with evergreen boughs, she held up the carving with questioning eyes. "Solstice gift," he said gruffly, stamping snow from his boots. "Tradition in these mountains. Longest night deserves something to remind us the light returns." "It's beautiful," Eliza said, genuinely moved by the unexpected gesture. "One wish. I had something to give you in return." "Having someone to share the solstice with is gift enough," Rhys replied, and then, as if embarrassed by this admission, busied himself arranging the evergreen boughs around the cabin. That evening, they shared a special meal, venison roast with roots Rhys had stored in his root cellar, and bread Eliza had baked in the wood stove. After dinner, Rhys surprised her again by producing a battered fiddle from a trunk near the fireplace. "You play?" Eliza asked, delighted by this new revelation. "Poorly," he admitted with a rare smile. "But on the solstice, tradition says, music helps guide the sun back to us. My grandmother taught me, said it was old mountain magic from her people." He tucked the instrument under his chin and drew the bow across the strings. The first notes were hesitant, almost shy, but soon a melody emerged, haunting and sweet, like something born from the mountains themselves. Eliza closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When she opened them again, she found Rhys watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The firelight played across his features, softening the harsh lines carved by grief and solitude. For the first time, she saw past the beard and weathered skin to the man beneath, no longer young, but still vital, still capable of beauty and tenderness despite all he had lost. "Play another," she urged when the first tune ended. And so he did, one song flowing into the next as the longest night of the year wrapped itself around the cabin. Outside, the wolves joined in, their distant howls weaving through Reese's melodies like silver threads through dark cloth. It was wild music, ancient and new all at once, and Eliza felt her child respond to it with dancing movements in her womb. As midnight approached, Reese set aside his fiddle and added more wood to the fire. The flames leaped higher, casting their faces in gold and shadow. Old tradition says wishes made at solstice midnight might just come true, he said, his voice low. Grandmother swore by it. Eliza thought about wishes, how as a child she had tossed pennies into fountains and blown out birthday candles with such certainty that her heart's desires would be granted. Life had taught her harsh lessons about the futility of such faith. Yet here in this cabin, surrounded by wilderness and warmed by firelight, she found herself wanting to believe again. "What would you wish for?" she asked Reese. He considered the question with the same seriousness he brought to all things. "Peace, I suppose. Not just the absence of trouble, but the kind that lives inside you regardless of what's happening around you. Found glimpses of it up here, but never could quite hold on to it. And you, Eliza Blackwood? What would you wish for on the longest?" "Night, a place to belong," she answered without hesitation. "Somewhere my child and I can be safe, where we're wanted rather than merely tolerated. Somewhere we can put down roots and grow without fear of being uprooted again." The words hung between them, raw with honesty. Reese nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing less. "Worthy wishes both," he said. "Now we wait for midnight and see if the old magic still works." They fell silent, watching the fire and listening to the wind's whispered secrets around the cabin eaves. When the old clock on the mantel began to strike 12, Reese reached across the space between their chairs and took Eliza's hand in his calloused palm against her smoother one, rough fingers intertwining with her slender ones. The contact was startling in its unexpectedness, but Eliza didn't pull away. Instead, she tightened her grip, drawing strength from this simple human connection. They sat like that until the final stroke faded, hands linked, gazes fixed on the dancing flames, each silently offering their wishes to whatever powers might be listening on this ancient night of transition. Outside, the wolves began to howl. Again, their voices rising in a chorus that celebrated the darkness, even as it acknowledged the coming light. Inside, two broken people held fast to each other, discovering that sometimes the first step toward healing is simply reaching out through the dark. January brought storms that buried the cabin in snow up to the windowsills. Reese spent hours, each day clearing paths to the necessary outbuildings, the smokehouse, the woodshed, the small barn where he kept 2 milk goats and a half-dozen chickens. Eliza watched from the window as he worked, his broad shoulders moving rhythmically with each shovelful of snow, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. In the evenings, they sat by the fire while Reese taught her to carve. Her first attempts were clumsy misshapen lumps that bore little resemblance to the animal she was trying to create. But Reese was a patient teacher, guiding her hands with gentle corrections, showing her how to find the creature waiting inside each block of wood. "You have to see it before you start cutting," he explained, demonstrating with his own knife on a fresh piece of pine. "The deer is already in there. Your job is just to set it free." Eliza's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing more pronounced as the child within became stronger and more active. In her 7th month now, she felt both powerful and vulnerable, a vessel for new life, yet increasingly limited in her movements. Reese watched her changing body with a mixture of wonder and concern, making adaptations around the cabin to ease her discomfort without being asked. A cushioned chair placed strategically near the fire, a stool in the kitchen so she could rest. While cooking, handles added to the walls near the outhouse to help her navigate the snowy path. One particularly brutal night, with the wind howling like 1,000 hungry ghosts and the temperature dropping well below zero, Eliza woke to the sound of wolves much closer to the cabin than usual. Their calls seemed urgent, almost desperate, cutting through the storm with primal intensity. She wrapped a quilt around her shoulders and padded to the main room, expecting to find Rhys already awake and alert to the unusual proximity of the pack. Instead, the room was empty, the fire banked for the night. No sign of his tall figure by the window where he often stood watch during storms. Fear prickled along her spine. Rhys wouldn't have gone out in such weather, not in the middle of the night, unless something was terribly wrong. She moved to the window, wiping condensation from the glass to peer into the swirling darkness. At first, she saw nothing but the relentless dance of snow in the faint light spilling from the cabin. Then a shape emerged from the white chaos. A massive wolf standing directly before the cabin door. Storm, the alpha female, was alone, her thick coat heavy with ice, her posture communicating urgency even to Eliza's untrained eye. The wolf raised her head and howled again, the sound carrying easily through the cabin's thick walls. Without stopping to question her instincts, Eliza pulled on Rhys's spare coat, which hung by the door. It enveloped her completely, falling past her knees and accommodating her pregnant belly with room to spare. She shoved her feet into her boots, wrapped a scarf around her head, and opened the cabin door. The blast of cold nearly took her breath away. Snow drove horizontally on, the vicious wind stinging her exposed skin like tiny needles. Storm remained motionless, watching Eliza with those intelligent golden eyes, showing neither fear nor aggression despite being mere feet away from a human. "What is it?" Eliza asked, feeling foolish for speaking to a wolf, yet somehow certain that Storm understood. "Where's Rhys?" As if in answer, the wolf turned and took several steps toward the forest edge, then looked back expectantly. The message was clear: "Follow me." Every rational thought in Eliza's mind screamed that this was madness, a pregnant woman following a wild predator into a blizzard in the middle of the night. But some deeper instinct, something primal that recognized the intelligence in Storm's gaze, compelled her forward. "Wait!" she called, ducking back inside to grab a lantern and matches. If she was going to do this insane thing, she would at least have light to guide her way back. Storm led her through the snow, moving slowly enough for Eliza to follow despite her awkward gait. The wolf chose the easiest path, avoiding deep drifts and dangerous slopes, occasionally looking back to ensure Eliza was still behind her. They had gone perhaps a quarter mile when Storm suddenly increased her pace, disappearing into a thicket of pines ahead. Eliza pushed forward, her breath coming in painful gasps, her legs leaden with exhaustion. She broke through the evergreen barrier to find herself in a small clearing. In the center, half buried in snow, lay a dark form that she recognized immediately as Rhys. "Gabriel!" she cried, rushing forward as quickly as her condition would allow. He was unconscious, his face alarmingly pale where it wasn't streaked, with blood from a gash across his forehead. Storm stood over him protectively, whining softly as Eliza approached. The wolf backed away just enough to allow her to kneel beside the fallen man. With shaking hands, Eliza brushed snow from Rhys's face and felt for a pulse at his neck. It was there, weak but steady. His skin was cold, but not yet showing signs of severe frostbite. He must have fallen recently, perhaps slipping on ice, while checking something during the storm. "Gabriel, can you hear me?" she called, patting his cheek gently. His eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. A groan escaped his lips, the most beautiful sound Eliza had ever heard, because it meant he was alive, conscious enough to feel pain. "We need to get you back to the cabin," she said, as much to herself as to him. The practical problem before her seemed insurmountable. Rhys was a large man, solidly built from years of physical labor. In her unencumbered state, Eliza might have been able to drag him, but 7 months pregnant, she lacked both the strength and the center of balance for such an effort. As if sensing her dilemma, Storm moved closer, nudging Rhys's arm with her muzzle. The wolf looked up at Eliza, then back down at Rhys, then made a strange sound, not quite a bark, not quite a howl. From the forest emerged the rest of the pack, 4 adult wolves who approached cautiously, eyeing Eliza but clearly responding to some signal from their alpha. Storm made the sound again, and to Eliza's astonishment, the wolves arranged themselves around Reese's prone form, 2 on each side. Understanding dawned. The wolves weren't threatening Reese, they were offering to help move him. "You want me to put him on your backs," Eliza said incredulously. "To carry him home." Storm's golden eyes held hers steadily, and Eliza made her choice. Working carefully, she positioned Reese across the wolves' backs, using his belt and her scarf to secure him as best she could. The animals stood perfectly still during this process, their powerful bodies braced to receive the human's weight. Once Reese was secured, Storm gave a low command sound, and the pack began to move in perfect synchronization, carrying their burden with surprising gentleness. Eliza followed, holding the lantern high to light their way through the blizzard. The journey back to the cabin seemed to take hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Every few yards, Eliza checked to ensure Reese was still secure, adjusting the makeshift harness when necessary. The wolves moved with deliberate care, choosing the easiest path through the snow, communicating with each other through subtle body language that Eliza could barely discern. When they finally reached the cabin, Eliza rushed ahead to open the door wide. The wolves carried Reese across the threshold and into the main room, where they stood patiently while Eliza untied her improvised bindings. With the last knot released, the animals moved in unison to lower Reese gently to the floor before the fireplace. "Thank you," Eliza said, looking into Storm's intelligent eyes. "I couldn't have saved him without you." The alpha wolf held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and led her pack back out into the night, disappearing into the swirling snow as silently as they had appeared. Eliza closed the door behind them, then turned her attention to the unconscious man on her floor. The real work of saving Gabriel Reese was just beginning, but thanks to an unlikely alliance with creatures most would consider enemies, she at least had the chance to try. Outside, the wolves' howls rose above the storm not hunting cries, but something that sounded almost like celebration. Inside, a woman who had been cast away by her own kind prepared to fight for the life of a man who had offered her sanctuary when no one else would. In the wilderness that had claimed them both, human and wolf had found common purpose and compassion. And in that shared act of mercy, something new and unexpected was being born alongside the child that grew within Eliza's womb, a different kind of family, forged not by blood, but by choice, by courage, and by the wild love that recognizes no boundaries between species. For 3 days, Eliza barely left Gabriel Reese's side. The head wound had been just the beginning of her discoveries, as she had carefully removed his snow-crusted clothing. His right leg was swollen and badly bruised, though thankfully not broken. His body was a canvas of purple-black contusions, suggesting he had tumbled down one of the steep slopes that bordered the eastern edge of his property. The first night had been the worst. Fever had gripped him by midnight, his skin alternating between burning heat and alarming clamminess. Eliza had used every remedy she could remember from her grandmother: cool cloths for the fever, herbal poultices for the wounds, and endless spoonfuls of broth coaxed between his cracked lips when moments of semi-consciousness allowed. "Don't you dare leave me out here alone, Gabriel Reese," she had whispered fiercely as his fever peaked in the darkest hours before dawn. Her hands, pressed to his chest, had felt the erratic drumming of his heart. "My baby needs you. I need you." Whether it was her care, her words, or simply his own stubborn will to live, Reese had survived that first critical night. By the second day, his fever had broken, and by the third, he had regained enough consciousness to recognize her. "The wolves" were his first coherent words, voice raspy from disuse. "Saved your life," Eliza finished, helping him sip water from a tin cup. "Storm found you and led me to you. Then the pack carried you home." Disbelief had flickered across his face, quickly replaced by a sort of wondering acceptance. Always said they were smarter than most humans, he had murmured before drifting back to sleep. Now on the 4th day since the rescue, Rhys sat propped against pillows before the fire, watching Eliza as she prepared their evening meal. His face was still pale beneath his beard, and the gash on his forehead was a vivid red against his skin, but his eyes were clear and alert. "You should be resting," he said, not for the first time that day. "In your condition, in my condition, I'm perfectly capable of making rabbit stew," Eliza interrupted, stirring the pot that hung over the fire. "The baby and I are fine. You're the one who decided to take a midnight stroll in a blizzard." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wasn't exactly by choice. One of the goats got loose, heard her bleeding outside, and went to bring her in before the wolves found her." His expression grew somber. "Must have slipped on the ice. Don't remember much after that. Well, the goat made it back on her own clever thing. And the wolves chose to save you rather than hunt you, which I think says something about the relationship you've built with them." Rhys was silent for a moment, his gaze turning to the window where the last light of day was fading into early winter darkness. "Never expected to owe my life to wolves. Or to a pregnant woman I barely know." Eliza paused in her stirring, suddenly uncertain. Had she overstepped by taking charge of his care so completely? Perhaps the intimacy of tending to his injuries had created a false sense of familiarity between them. "I know you didn't ask for any of this," she said carefully. "First me showing up half frozen on your doorstep, and now having to be nursed like an invalid. I'm sorry to be such a burden." "A burden?" Rhys's voice was sharp with surprise. "Eliza, you saved my life. Would have frozen to death out there if not for you and Storm. I only found you because of Storm, and I couldn't have brought you back without the pack. But you followed a wild wolf into a blizzard in the middle of the night, 7 months pregnant, because you knew something was wrong." He shook his head, wonder and disbelief mingling in his expression. "Most people would have barred the door and waited for morning." "Most people haven't been saved by your wolves before," Eliza replied simply. She ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls and brought one to Rhys, settling herself in the chair beside him. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional howl of wind around the cabin eaves. Outside, the January night wrapped the mountain in star-strewn darkness, the recent storm having blown itself out to reveal a sky of piercing clarity. "I've been thinking," Rhys said finally, setting aside his empty bowl, "about what happens when spring comes." Eliza's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where her child due in early March according to her calculations shifted restlessly. The question of her future loomed larger with each passing day, a shadow at the edge of the temporary sanctuary she had found. "I know I can't stay here indefinitely," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Once the baby comes and the pass is clear, I'll need to find some place where we can. Or you could stay." Rhys interrupted, his eyes fixed on the fire rather than her face. "Both of you." The words hung in the air between them, laden with implications that made Eliza's heart beat faster. Stay? As what, exactly? Now he did look at her, his gaze direct and unwavering. "As my wife, if you'd be willing. As my family." "Gabriel." Eliza set her own bowl aside, her appetite gone. "You don't need to offer marriage out of some misplaced sense of obligation. You've done more than enough by taking us in through the winter. It's not obligation." His voice was low but firm. "These past weeks, having you here, it's woken something in me I thought died with Sarah and James, something I never expected to feel again." "You barely know me," Eliza protested, though something warm and hopeful was unfurling in her chest. "And I'm carrying another man's child. I know you're brave enough to face a blizzard and a wolf pack to save a man's life. I know you're strong enough to keep going when your own family threw you away. I know you have gentle hands and a kind heart. His own hand, still bearing the marks of his fall, reached across the space between them to rest lightly on hers. As for the child, he or she would be mine in every way that matters, if you'd allow it. Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. The offer was more than she had dared to hope for: a home, a name for her child, a chance at building something lasting from the wreckage of her former life. And yet, I don't want your pity, Gabriel. Pity? He almost laughed, though there was no mockery in the sound. Eliza Blackwood, the last thing I feel for you is pity. Admiration, yes, respect, absolutely. And something else I'm still finding the courage to name. His fingers tightened slightly around hers. I'm not asking for an answer now. Just think about it. Spring's still months away. Before she could respond, a familiar howl sounded from the edge of the clearing storms. Distinctive voice calling to her pack. Reese's expression softened as he listened. They're hunting tonight, he said. Good sign. Means there's game moving despite the snow. Eliza recognized his deliberate change of subject and was grateful for it. She needed time to process his unexpected proposal, to separate the practical advantages from the emotional complications. Tell me more about them, she said, nodding toward the window where the wolves' calls echoed through the night. About how you came to understand them so well. Relief crossed his features, and he settled back against the pillows. It started with Storm, like I told you before. But there's more to it than just freeing her from that trap. As Reese spoke of his years of careful observation and growing respect for the wolf pack, Eliza felt the tension ease from her shoulders. Whatever decision she made about his proposal would wait for another day. Tonight, there was warmth and safety and the sharing of stories between two people who had found each other in the wilderness against all odds. Outside, the wolves sang to the stars, their ancient voices weaving patterns as complex and beautiful as the snowflakes that had brought Eliza to this mountain sanctuary. Inside, the seeds of something new and unexpected continued to grow, not just the child beneath her heart, but the fragile beginnings of trust, of healing, and perhaps of love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. February arrived with a brief thaw that turned the snow-covered landscape into a treacherous mixture of ice and slush. Reese, now fully recovered from his injuries, spent the warmer days repairing damage to the outbuildings and laying in additional supplies from his carefully hidden caches throughout the property. The baby was due in just a few weeks, and he was determined that nothing would be left to chance. Eliza watched him from the cabin window as he worked, her hands resting on her now enormous belly. The child was active today, turning and kicking as if eager to greet the world. She had begun to think of the baby as a daughter, though she had no way of knowing for certain. In her mind, she called the child Hope, a name that reflected the unexpected second chance that had come from such desperate circumstances. She had not yet given Reese an answer to his proposal. The question hung between them, acknowledged but undiscussed as January had melted into February. He had not pressed her, seeming content to let her take the time she needed. But Eliza knew that a decision could not be postponed much longer. Either she would accept his offer and stay, building a life with him in these mountains, or she would leave when spring fully arrived, taking her child to seek their fortune elsewhere. The practical advantages of accepting were obvious. Reese offered security, protection, and a father for her child. His cabin was comfortable, his skills as a provider well proven. He was a good mankind despite his gruff exterior, honorable in his dealings and surprisingly gentle for someone who had spent so many years in isolation. But marriage should be more than a practical arrangement, shouldn't it? Her parents' union had been one of convenience rather than passion, and look how quickly they had abandoned their own daughter when she became inconvenient. Eliza wanted more than that for herself and her child. She wanted the kind of love that would withstand any storm, any challenge. Did she love Gabriel Reese? The question was more complex than it appeared. She admired him deeply. She enjoyed his company and felt safe in his presence. The sight of him returning to the cabin after a day's work brought her genuine happiness. When their hands accidentally touched while sharing tasks, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the ever-present fire. But was that love? How could she know, when her only previous experience had been with a charming deceiver who had disappeared at the first sign of responsibility? Lost in these thoughts, Eliza almost missed the movement at the forest edge. A gray shape, then another, emerged from the tree's wolves, approaching the clearing around the cabin with purposeful strides. She recognized Storm at once, the alphas. Distinctive silver markings, unmistakable even at a distance. Behind her came 3 other adults and, surprisingly, 2 half-grown pups that Eliza had never seen before. Reese saw them too. He set down his tools and turned to face the approaching pack, his posture relaxed but attentive. This was the first time the wolves had come so openly to the cabin since the night of the rescue, though their howls could be heard most evenings as they patrolled their territory. Storm approached Reese directly, closing the distance until she stood just a few feet away from him. The wolf's head was level with his waist, her powerful body radiating strength and confidence. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Man and wolf regarded each other with a mutual respect that transcended species barriers. Then, to Eliza's astonishment, Storm lowered herself to the ground, resting her massive head on her front paws in a posture of complete submission. One by one, the other adult wolves followed suit, until only the 2 pups remained standing, their curiosity overcoming the instinct to imitate their elders. Reese stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly knelt in the snow before Storm. He extended his hand, palm down, and the alpha wolf raised her head just enough to touch her nose to his fingers. The gesture seemed ceremonial, laden with meaning that Eliza could sense but not fully understand. Unable to contain her curiosity, she pulled on her coat and stepped outside, moving carefully across the icy ground toward this unprecedented gathering. At her appearance, the wolves' attention shifted. Storm's golden eyes fixed on Eliza's swollen belly with unmistakable interest. "What's happening?" Eliza asked softly as she reached Reese's side. "They've brought their young to meet us," he replied, his voice filled with wonder. "It's a sign of trust I've never seen before. Wolf packs keep their pups hidden from humans at all costs." Storm rose and approached Eliza, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. The wolf circled her once, nose working as she took in Eliza's scent, paying particular attention to her pregnant belly. Then Storm did something that took Eliza's breath away. She pressed her massive head gently against the swell where the baby grew, as if listening to the life within. "She knows," Eliza whispered. "She understands that I'm carrying a child." "Wolves have an instinctive reverence for new life," Reese confirmed. "Their societies revolve around the protection and raising of pups. Storm is acknowledging your condition and offering the pack's protection to both you and the child." As if to confirm his words, Storm made a soft whining sound and looked back at the 2 pups, who had been watching from a safe distance. At some signal Eliza couldn't discern, the young wolves approached cautiously, their ears forward with curiosity. They were beautiful creatures, their coats still possessing the woolly softness of youth despite their nearly adult size. "The black one is a male, the gray a female," Reese said. "Born last spring, they're Storm's latest litter. This is the first time I've seen them this close to the cabin." The pups circled Eliza with youthful enthusiasm, their earlier caution giving way to genuine interest. The female was bolder, coming close enough that Eliza could have touched her if she dared. The male hung back slightly, watching his sister's investigation with alert eyes. "They're magnificent," Eliza breathed. Any fear she might have felt at being surrounded by wild predators had long since vanished. replaced by a profound sense of privilege at being allowed this intimate glimpse into their society. The moment was broken by a sharp bark from one of the adult wolves. Storm's head came up, ears swiveling toward the forest. Something had alerted the pack, a sound or scent that human senses couldn't detect. With a final look at Eliza's belly, Storm gathered her family with subtle movements of her body, and the wolves melted back into the trees as silently as they had appeared. "What was that about?" Eliza asked when the last tail had disappeared from view. Reese's expression was thoughtful as he helped her back toward the cabin. The brief exertion in the cold had tired her more than she wanted to admit. "In 15 years, I've never seen them behave that way," he said. "Wolves are cautious creatures by nature, especially around humans. For Storm to bring her pups here, to acknowledge your pregnancy so directly, it's unprecedented. Do you think it has something to do with the rescue? With them helping to save you that night? Perhaps." He held the cabin door for her, the warmth within a welcome contrast to the February chill. "Or perhaps it's something more ancient. There are old stories in these mountains about wolves and humans working together, helping each other survive when times were hard. My grandmother used to tell them tales of women who ran with wolf packs, of children raised by wolves during harsh winters when their human families couldn't feed them." "Like Romulus and Remus?" Eliza asked, remembering the Roman myth from her school days. "Similar, but these were Cherokee stories, passed down through my grandmother's family. She believed there was truth behind them, that long ago, the line between human and wolf was less fixed than we think." He helped her settle into her chair by the fire. "Wolves are family-centered creatures, with complex social bonds and remarkable intelligence. In many ways, they're more loyal and honorable than people." Eliza considered this as she warmed her hands before the flames. "What do you think Storm was trying to tell us by bringing her pups?" Reese was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. "I think she was introducing her family to ours, acknowledging that you and the child are now under her protection, just as I have been." He met Eliza's eyes directly. "Wolves mate for life, Eliza. They don't take that commitment lightly." The implication was clear, though delicately stated. Storm had seen what Eliza and Reese themselves were still negotiating, the formation of a new family unit, a joining of lives that had previously been separate. "Gabriel," Eliza began, knowing it was time to address the proposal that had hung between them for weeks. "About what you asked." A sharp pain cut off her words, radiating from her lower back around to her abdomen. She gasped, hands flying to her belly. "Eliza?" Alarm sharpened Reese's voice as he knelt beside her chair. "What is it? What's wrong?" "I'm not sure," she managed when the pain subsided. It felt like another wave hit, stronger this time, forcing a small cry from her lips. Understanding dawned on Reese's face. "The baby. It's coming." "It can't be," Eliza protested. "It's too early. I'm not due for 3 more weeks." "Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them," Reese said, his calm tone belied by the worry in his eyes. "My Sarah was a midwife before we married. I helped her sometimes when there was no other man to assist. I know the signs." Fear clutched at Eliza's heart. She had known this moment would come, had tried to prepare herself mentally for the ordeal of childbirth in this remote cabin, far from doctors or hospitals. But now that it was happening, the reality was terrifying. "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered. "What if nothing will go wrong?" Reese said with a conviction that brooked no argument. "You're strong, Eliza Blackwood. Stronger than anyone I've ever known. You crossed these mountains alone in winter while carrying a child. You faced down a wolf pack without flinching. You saved my life in a blizzard. Bringing this baby into the world will be just one more impossible thing you've managed to do." His faith in her was like a physical force, pushing back against the tide of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Eliza took a deep breath, then another, forcing herself to think clearly despite the pain that continued to come in waves. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steadier now. Rhys squeezed her hand once, then rose with purpose. "First, we prepare. There's clean linen in the chest, water to boil, and my Sarah's birthing kit in the workshop. I've kept it all these years, though I never thought to use it again." As he moved efficiently around the cabin, gathering supplies and arranging the bedroom for the birthing, Eliza was struck by the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, she had been cast out by her family, alone and desperate, with no hope for her future or her child's. Now she was about to give birth in a mountain cabin with a man who had offered to make her his wife, while a pack of wolves stood guard in the surrounding forest. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort as Eliza's body worked to bring new life into the world. Rhys proved himself a capable birth attendant, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he helped position her, wiped sweat from her brow, and murmured steady encouragement through each contraction. Outside, the short February day faded into darkness, and with nightfall came the wolves' song, not their usual hunting calls, but something different. The howls seemed to surround the cabin in concentric circles of sound, creating a protective barrier of wild voices against the vast wilderness beyond. "They know," Rhys said during a brief respite between contractions. "Somehow they know what's happening here." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As midnight approached, Eliza felt a change in her body, an overwhelming urge to push. To complete this journey that had begun 9 months ago with hope and love before descending into abandonment and despair, only to rise again in this most unexpected of places. "It's time," she gasped, gripping Rhys's hand with strength that surprised them both. "I'm here," he promised, positioning himself to receive the child. "I'm right here with you, Eliza. You're not alone." With a final tremendous effort that seemed to channel all the strength she had developed through months of hardship and survival, Eliza brought her daughter into the world. The child's first cry rose clear and strong, harmonizing with the wolves outside in a sound that seemed to bridge the gap between wilderness and civilization, between animal and human, between past and future. "A girl," Rhys announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the infant in clean linen. "Perfect and strong, just like her mother." He placed the tiny bundle in Eliza's arms, and she looked down into a face that instantly became the center of her universe. The baby had a cap of dark hair, skin still mottled from birth, and eyes that, when they briefly opened, were the deep blue of all newborns. Her tiny fists were clenched as if ready to fight whatever challenges life might bring, and her cry had already settled into a healthy, indignant demand for attention to her needs. "Hope," Eliza whispered, the name she had carried in her heart now bestowed upon this miraculous new being. "Her name is Hope." "Hope," Rhys repeated, sitting beside them on the bed, one large finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "It suits her." Outside, the wolves' song reached a crescendo, as if celebrating the successful arrival of the newest member of their extended pack. Inside, exhausted but triumphant, Eliza made the decision that had been forming in her heart since the night Gabriel Rhys had offered her more than just shelter from a storm. "Yes," she said, looking up from her daughter's face to meet his questioning gaze. "My answer is yes, Gabriel. We'll stay. We'll be a family, you, me, and Hope." The joy that transformed his weathered features was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual at first, then blazing with undeniable brilliance. He bent to kiss her forehead, then the top of Hope's downy head, his touch gentle but fervent with promise. "I'll spend every day making sure you never regret that decision," he vowed. "I know you will," Eliza replied simply. "That's why I made it." As February's darkness cradled the cabin and its precious occupants, The wolves fell silent one by one, their protective vigil complete. Inside, a man who had lost everything found himself guardian of a new and unexpected treasure. A woman who had been thrown away discovered that sometimes being lost is the only way to be truly found. And a child born of one man's betrayal and another's redemption slept peacefully, unaware that her very existence had helped bridge the ancient divide between the wild and the tamed, between solitude and connection, between despair and hope. In the harshest season, in the most unforgiving wilderness, love had found a way to bloom, not the fragile, conditional love that Eliza had known before, but something wilder and more enduring. Something that, like the wolves who had helped bring it into being, would face each storm with courage and each challenge with unwavering loyalty. Something that, having once been found, would never again be lost. Spring came to the mountains with a gentle persistence that belied the harshness of the winter before. The snow retreated day by day, revealing patches of earth that seemed to exhale with relief at feeling the sun's warmth again. Tiny green shoots pushed through the softening ground, and the trees that had stood as silent sentinels through the freezing months now whispered with new life as their buds swelled and burst. In the cabin that had become her home, Eliza Reese sat by the open window, nursing her daughter as the fresh mountain air carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Hope was 3 months old now, a thriving bundle of curiosity and determination who had her mother's dark hair and her adoptive father's watchful blue-gray eyes. She nursed vigorously, one tiny hand pressed against Eliza's breast as if to ensure the milk flowed faster to match her hearty appetite. "Strong girl," Eliza murmured, stroking the silky head that was now covered with a thicker crop of dark curls. "Just like your father said you would be." Gabriel had been right about so many things. He had promised Eliza that she would never regret her decision to stay, to join her life with his in this wilderness sanctuary, and she hadn't not for a single moment. The simple ceremony that had united them just 2 weeks after Hope's birth had been witnessed only by the ancient mountains and the ever-present wolves, but it had felt more sacred than any church wedding could have been. The gold band on Eliza's finger caught the morning light as she shifted Hope to her shoulder for burping. The ring had been Sarah's once, carefully preserved among Gabriel's few treasured possessions. When he had offered it to Eliza, his eyes had held a question. Was it wrong to give his new bride something that had belonged to his first wife? But Eliza had understood the deeper meaning behind the gesture. By giving her Sarah's ring, Gabriel was honoring his past while embracing his future, acknowledging that love lost did not diminish love found. "There's my girls," came Gabriel's voice from the doorway as he entered from his morning chores. He crossed to them in 3 long strides, bending to kiss first Hope's head and then Eliza's lips with a tenderness that still made her heart skip. "And how are the 2 most beautiful creatures in these mountains today?" "Hungry," Eliza replied with a laugh. "Both of us. Hope has decided that milk alone isn't enough anymore. She watches every bite I take with those big eyes of hers. I think she's ready to try some solid food." "Takes after her mother there," Gabriel teased, gently taking the baby from her arms. Hope went to him eagerly, her face lighting with a gummy smile that never failed to transform her father's weathered features into something boyish and unguarded, always wanting to rush ahead to the next challenge. He settled into the rocking chair with practiced ease, cradling Hope against his broad chest where she immediately began to explore his beard with curious fingers. The sight never failed to move Eliza, this large, solitary man who had been so broken by loss, now utterly enchanted by a child not of his blood, but completely of his heart. "I found fresh tracks this morning," Gabriel said, gently disentangling Hope's fingers from his beard. "Storm's pack crossed the eastern ridge sometime before dawn. Looks like they're moving back to their summer hunting grounds now that the snow's mostly gone." Eliza felt a pang of something like nostalgia. The wolves had maintained their unusual vigilance around the cabin throughout the winter, their haunting songs a nightly lullaby for hope. Storm herself had appeared periodically at the forest edge, sometimes alone, sometimes with members of her pack, her golden eyes fixed on the cabin as if ensuring that mother and child remain safe. "Will they go far?" she asked, already missing their wild neighbors. "Not too far. They'll stay within their territory, which includes this valley. We'll still hear them at night, still see signs of their passing." Gabriel's eyes crinkled with understanding. "You've grown attached to them." "How could I not? They saved you when you fell. They helped us bring hope into the world. Sometimes I think they understand more about what happens in this cabin than any human neighbors could." "My grandmother would say they're spirit guardians," Gabriel replied, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence that Eliza had come to love during the long winter evenings. In her stories, wolves chose certain humans to watch over, those who respected the old ways, who took only what they needed from the land and gave back in equal measure. Hope gurgled happily, as if appreciating the tale, and Gabriel smiled down at her. "Maybe they recognize something in you, Eliza, some quality that made them decide you belonged here in these mountains, under their protection. Or maybe they just have good taste in humans," Eliza teased, rising to prepare breakfast. The simple domestic act still gave her a profound satisfaction, creating a meal for her family in this home they now shared. As she worked, Eliza reflected on how completely her life had transformed in the span of a single winter. The desperate, abandoned young woman who had stumbled through a blizzard with nowhere to go and no one to turn to was now a wife, a mother, and the mistress of a mountain homestead that, while modest, provided everything they needed. Gabriel had taught her the skills necessary for wilderness survival, how to identify edible plants, how to maintain the careful balance between taking from the land and nurturing it, how to read the weather from cloud patterns and animal behavior. In return, Eliza had brought warmth and purpose back into his solitary existence, giving him a reason to look toward the future rather than dwelling in the past. Together, they had expanded the garden plot behind the cabin, planning for crops that would feed them through the next winter. They had repaired and improved the outbuildings, added a larger chicken coop to increase their flock, and begun the slow process of turning Gabriel's bachelor homestead into a proper family home. Hope had been the catalyst for many of these changes. Her arrival had shifted their priorities, clarifying what was truly important and what could be set aside. Every improvement to the cabin, every new skill mastered, every plan made for the future was now centered around providing a safe and nurturing environment for this small life that had been entrusted to their care. After breakfast with Hope settled for her morning nap, Gabriel and Eliza walked the property together as had become their custom. The ritual allowed them to check fences, monitor wildlife signs, and discuss the day's work ahead. It was also precious time alone together, a chance to connect as husband and wife rather than just as parents. "I've been thinking," Gabriel said as they paused by the creek that ran along the western boundary of their land. The water, swollen with snowmelt, rushed over smooth stones with a sound like continuous applause. "About making a trip to town next month." Eliza looked at him in surprise. In the entire time she had known him, Gabriel had never voluntarily suggested going to Clearwater, the nearest settlement. His monthly supply runs were necessary but brief, conducted with the minimum of social interaction and a clear eagerness to return to his mountain solitude. "Any particular reason?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. The idea of seeing other people, of introducing Hope to a world beyond their isolated valley, both excited and unnerved her. Gabriel picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water's surface, watching it bounce 3 times before disappearing. "Hope should be registered properly. Birth certificate, legal recognition that she's our daughter, and—" He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. "I thought you might want to send word to your family. Let them know you're safe, that you've made a life for yourself." that their granddaughter is healthy and thriving. Eliza's chest tightened at the mention of her parents. She had not allowed herself to think of them often, the pain of their rejection still too raw despite the happiness she had found. They made their choice, she said, her voice harder than she intended. They chose their reputation over their daughter. They did, Gabriel agreed, his own tone neutral. And nothing excuses that. But people can change, Eliza. Sometimes it takes losing something precious to realize what truly matters. He picked up another stone, turning it over in his large, calloused hands. My own father and I were estranged for years, argued over my choice to marry Sarah when he thought I should take over the family business instead. Stubborn old man refused to come to our wedding, refused to acknowledge her as my wife. This was new information. Gabriel rarely spoke of his life before coming to the mountains, and Eliza had never pressed, respecting his privacy as he respected hers. What happened? She asked softly. James was born. My father got word of his first grandson, and something in him broke open. Drove 300 miles in the middle of the night just to see that tiny face. Gabriel's eyes were distant, with memory. He apologized to Sarah, told me he'd been a fool. We had 4 good years of family peace before the mudslide took them all. Sarah, James, my parents had been visiting for the weekend. The revelation stunned Eliza. She had known about Gabriel's loss of his wife and son, but not that his parents had perished in the same tragedy. No wonder he had retreated from the world so completely, seeking solace in wilderness isolation. I'm not saying your parents deserve forgiveness, Gabriel continued, finally meeting her eyes. That's for you to decide. I'm just saying that the door doesn't have to stay closed forever, not if you don't want it to. Hope might benefit from knowing her mother's family someday, and they might be different people now than they were when they sent you away. Eliza gazed at the rushing creek, watching how it navigated around obstacles in its path, sometimes flowing over them, sometimes finding new channels but always moving forward. I'll think about it, she promised. But I'm not ready yet. No rush, Gabriel assured her, his arm slipping around her waist. Just something to consider as hope grows. Speaking of whom, she'll be waking soon, hungry as a bear cub after hibernation. They turned back toward the cabin, walking hand in hand through the spring-awakened forest. Birds called from the trees, staking territory and seeking mates in. The ancient rhythms of the season. New green unfurled from every branch, and wildflowers dotted the path with splashes of color after the monochrome months of winter. As they neared the clearing around their home, movement at the forest edge caught Eliza's attention. She stopped, her hand tightening on Gabriel's, and he followed her gaze to where Storm stood watching them, her silver-gray coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the trees. The wolf was not alone. Beside her stood the black male pup, now nearly grown, his coat glossy and his posture confident as he observed the humans from a respectful distance. And nestled between Storm's front paws was a tiny bundle of fur, a new pup from this year's litter, its downy coat still soft with infancy, its eyes bright with curiosity about the world it was just beginning to explore. She's showing us her new baby, Eliza whispered, awed by the deliberate parallel. Just as we showed her hope. Gabriel nodded, his expression one of profound respect for the wild creature that had formed such an unusual bond with his family. It's an honor, he said simply. Storm doesn't show her young pups to anyone, not even to me before you came. The moment stretched between species, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience, the universal vulnerability and fierce protectiveness of parenthood, the instinctive drive to nurture and defend new life, regardless of whether one walked on 2 legs or 4. Then, with a subtle movement that spoke volumes to those who had learned to read wolf body language, Storm guided her pup back toward the forest depths. The black male followed, but not before giving what Eliza could have sworn was a respectful nod in their direction. We're blessed, Gabriel said as they continued toward the cabin. To have found each other, to have hope, to share this land. With creatures who recognize us as fellow travelers rather than enemies. Yes, Eliza agreed, thinking of the desperate journey that had led her to this unexpected paradise. Blessed beyond anything I could have imagined when I was stumbling through that blizzard. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. As spring deepened into early summer, the family established new routines to match the changing season. Hope grew stronger daily, now able to sit unassisted and beginning to sample the simplest of solid foods, mashed berries and soft roots that Eliza prepared with loving care. Her laughter, a relatively new development, filled the cabin with a joy that seemed to banish the last lingering shadows of Gabriel's long isolation. The promised trip to Clearwater came in early June, when the mountain passes were fully clear and travel was as easy as it ever became in this rugged terrain. They made the journey in Gabriel's sturdy wagon. Hope secured an ingenious carrying basket that he had crafted specifically for her. Eliza had approached the expedition with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. 6 months had passed since she had seen another human being besides Gabriel and Hope, and the prospect of dealing with curious stares and inevitable questions made her stomach knot with anxiety. Just remember, Gabriel had told her as they approached the town limits, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're Eliza Reese now, my wife and Hope's mother. Anyone who can't see your worth isn't worth your concern. His unwavering support had given her the courage to hold her head high as they navigated the small settlement's main street. Clearwater was hardly more than a gathering of essential services for the surrounding homesteads and ranches. A general store, a small church, a combination post office and sheriff's office, and a modest boarding house that served meals to travelers. To Eliza's relief, they were treated with polite interest rather than censure. Gabriel was known to the townspeople as a reclusive but fair-dealing mountain man who brought quality furs and occasional handcrafted furniture to trade for supplies. His appearance with a wife and infant daughter caused some raised eyebrows. But the community had its own unwritten code that valued privacy and self-sufficiency above social conformity. The legal matters were handled with surprising ease. The county clerk, a pragmatic woman who had seen every variation of family arrangement in her 30 years of service, recorded Hope's birth with minimal questions, listing Gabriel as the father without requiring proof beyond his sworn statement. Marriage records were similarly uncomplicated in this frontier-minded community, where formal ceremonies were often impossible due to distance and weather. By noon, Eliza found herself officially Mrs. Gabriel Reese. Hope was legally their daughter. And the small family was sharing a meal at the boarding house while Gabriel arranged for their supplies to be loaded. Mrs. Peterson makes the best apple pie in 3 counties, Gabriel told her as they waited for their food. Been coming here once a month for 15 years, and it's still the one thing from town I look forward to. As if summoned by her name. The boarding house proprietor approached their table, a plump, white-haired woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Gabriel Reese, she declared, hands on her ample hips. 15 years you've been eating my cooking, and not once did. You mentioned you had a wife and child hidden away in those mountains of yours. Before Gabriel could respond, the woman turned to Eliza with a smile that transformed her stern face into something grandmotherly and kind. I'm Martha Peterson, dear. And who might this beautiful little one be? Hope, Eliza replied, surprised by how easily conversation came after months of speaking only to Gabriel. And I'm Eliza. We haven't actually been hidden away for 15 years, just since last winter. Understanding dawned in Mrs. Peterson's eyes as she took in Eliza's youth and the baby's age. But rather than judgment, her expression showed only warm approval. Well, it's about time this one found someone to care for besides himself and those wolves he's so fond of, she said, nodding toward Gabriel. Man needs a family to keep him civilized. And you, young lady, clearly have good sense. If you got him to put a ring on your finger. Not many women would brave those mountains year-round. The conversation that followed was a balm to Eliza's social starvation. Mrs. Peterson proved to be a repository of local knowledge, filling her in on the community's history, personalities, and unspoken rules while simultaneously cooing over hope and pressing second helpings on Gabriel. "You come see me whenever you're in town," the older woman insisted as they prepared to leave. "And if you ever need female company up in those woods, or help with this little angel, you send word. I may be old, but I can still ride a horse and birth a baby if needed." The offer of friendship, so unexpected and genuine, brought tears to Eliza's eyes. She had resigned herself to isolation as the price of her new life, accepting that the security and love she had found with Gabriel might mean never having female companionship again. "Thank you," she managed, impulsively hugging the sturdy older woman. "That means more than you know." The return journey to their mountain home was filled with quiet conversation as Eliza and Gabriel digested the day's experiences. Hope slept peacefully in her basket, lulled by the wagon's steady motion. Her small face relaxed in the innocent slumber of the utterly secure. "I'd forgotten what it was like," Gabriel admitted as they climbed the final ridge that would bring their cabin into view. "Being around other people wasn't as difficult as I remembered." "Mrs. Peterson made it easy," Eliza replied. "She's a remarkable woman, that she is. Raised 6 children on her own after her husband was killed in a mining accident. Built that boarding house from nothing, educated all her kids, and still finds time to make the best pie west of the Mississippi." He glanced at Eliza with a slightly sheepish expression. "She's been trying to matchmake for me for years. Kept telling me I needed a good woman to shake me out of my hermit ways." "Looks like she finally got her wish," Eliza teased, enjoying the rare flush that colored Gabriel's tanned cheeks. "Best thing that ever happened to me," he agreed seriously. "You and Hope both." As they crested the ridge, the valley spread before them in all its summer glory. Their cabin nestled against the protective embrace of the forest, the garden plots now lush with growing vegetables, the small barn and outbuildings forming a tidy compound that represented security and sustenance. Beyond stretched the wilderness, mountains piled upon mountains in blue-green waves that extended to the horizon. "It's beautiful," Eliza said softly, seeing their home with fresh eyes after the day in town. "More beautiful than any place I've ever known." "It's harsh too," Gabriel reminded her. "Winter will come again. There will be storms and lean times and moments when the isolation feels like a burden rather than a blessing." "I know." She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "But we'll face those times together, the 3 of us. And we're not as alone as I thought. We have friends, Mrs. Peterson, the wolves, maybe others we haven't met yet." Gabriel guided the wagon down the slope toward home, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said before, about creating something lasting here. Maybe it's time to expand a bit. The valley could support a few cattle, maybe some sheep. We could build a proper root cellar for storing more food through the winter, add a room to the cabin for when Hope gets older." The plan spoke of permanence, of a future measured in years and decades rather than just surviving until the next season. Eliza felt a surge of joy at the implicit promise in his words, that this place, this life they were building together, was not just a temporary refuge but a legacy they were creating for their daughter. "I'd like that," she said simply. Hope stirred in her basket, making the small snuffling sounds that presaged waking. Eliza lifted her daughter, cradling her close as the child blinked sleepily at the familiar surroundings of the valley that was the only home she had ever known. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As they approached the cabin, movement at the forest edge drew their attention. Storm stood watching their return, her powerful form silhouetted against the deeper shadows of the pines. Beside her was the tiny pup she had shown them weeks earlier, now more steady on its legs but still staying close to its mother's protective presence. Gabriel stopped the wagon, and for a long moment, the two families regarded each other across the dividing line between wilderness and homestead. No words were spoken, none were needed. The bond that had formed during that desperate winter night when wolves helped carry a fallen man home had deepened into something beyond explanation, a mutual recognition of shared territory and shared purpose, a respect that transcended the ancient barriers between wild and tamed. With a slight dip of her massive head that might have been a nod of greeting, Storm led her pup back into the forest depths. Their departure was unhurried, the natural movement of creatures returning to their own domain after acknowledging the rightful presence of neighbors. "Welcome home," Gabriel said, helping Eliza down from the wagon, his strong hands lingering at her waist, a moment longer than necessary. "Home," Eliza repeated, the word carrying all the weight of her journey, from desperate flight to sanctuary, from solitude to family, from abandonment to belonging. That evening, as dusk settled over the mountains and hope slept peacefully in the cradle Gabriel had carved for her, Eliza stood on the cabin porch watching the first stars appear. Gabriel joined her, his arms sliding around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. "About staying, about marrying me, about making a life so far from everything you once knew?" Eliza leaned into his solid warmth, considering the question with the honesty it deserved. "None," she said finally. "I lost what I thought was my world, only to find that the world is so much larger than I ever imagined. I lost a family that couldn't accept me as I am, only to find one that cherishes every part of me, including the parts that others found shameful." She turned in the circle of his arms to face him, her eyes holding his in the deepening twilight. "What about you? Do you ever wish you'd continued your solitary existence, without a wife and child to complicate your days?" Gabriel's laugh was low and genuine. "I thought solitude was peace," he said. "I confused the absence of pain with healing. But true healing only began the day you stumbled into my life, half frozen and wholly determined to survive. You and hope haven't complicated my existence, you've given it meaning beyond simple survival." From the forest came the first howls of the evening as Storm's pack began their nightly chorus. The sound was no longer eerie or threatening to Eliza's ears, but rather a wild harmony that complemented the human rhythms of their homestead, a reminder that they were part of something larger than themselves, connected to ancient patterns of life and death, nurture and growth, challenge and triumph. Inside the cabin, Hope made a small sound in her sleep, as if responding to the wolves' song even in dreams. Gabriel and Eliza moved as one to check on their daughter, finding her peaceful and secure in the cradle beside their bed. "She'll grow up differently than either of us," Eliza observed, gently stroking the dark curls that had become more pronounced as Hope's hair thickened. Between mountains and wolves, with two parents who chose each other and chose her, she never doubt that she belongs exactly where she is. "That's the greatest gift we can give her," Gabriel agreed. "The certainty of being wanted, of being cherished for exactly who she is." He wrapped his arms around Eliza from behind, resting his chin on top of her head as they both gazed down at their sleeping child. "And maybe someday she'll have brothers or sisters to share this life with." The gentle suggestion sent warmth spreading through Eliza's chest. The idea of more children, of expanding their small family to fill this home with noise and laughter and the organized chaos of growing things, was both thrilling and right. "I'd like that," she said, turning in his embrace to seal the tacit agreement with a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future. Outside, the wolves continued their ancient song to the stars, their voices rising and falling in patterns as old as the mountains themselves. Inside, a family born of desperation and rescue, of courage and compassion, of wild and tamed hearts finding common ground, settled into the rhythm of a life that would span seasons and years, challenges and joys, all anchored in the bedrock. Certainty of belonging. Eliza Blackwood had been thrown to wolves in the cruelest winter of her life, cast out by those who should have protected her, abandoned to wilderness both literal and figurative. But in that wilderness, she had found not the death she feared, but a rebirth she could never have imagined, as wife to a man who saw her strength rather than her shame, as mother to a daughter who would grow up knowing only acceptance, as friend to creatures who recognized in her a kindred spirit worthy of their rare allegiance. The journey had nearly broken her, but in the breaking, she had discovered a resilience within herself that no storm could shake, no judgment could diminish, no hardship could overcome. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned but tempered, stronger at the broken places, capable of a love as wild and enduring as the mountains that had become her home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.